Lily's small hand pressed against the frosted window, her breath creating tiny clouds as she squinted through the swirling snow. That's when she saw it, a dark shape against the white. Something that shouldn't be there. "Stop the truck!" she screamed, her voice piercing the quiet hum of the engine. Walter Montgomery slammed on the brakes, the pickup fishtailing dangerously on the ice-slicked road. "There's a dog out there," Lily cried, already fumbling with her seatbelt, tiny fingers trembling with urgency. Through the thickening blizzard, the German shepherd's silhouette became clearer. A once majestic animal now slumped against a tree trunk, ice crusting its fur, a rope cutting into its neck. "It's dying," Lily whispered, tears instantly freezing on her cheeks. The temperature display read -22 degrees. The dog's eyes, barely open, met hers through the window. In that fractured moment, something passed between them, a desperate final plea from a creature who had given up hope. What happened next would not only save the dog's life, but uncover a darkness in Pinecrest that had claimed dozens of victims, both animal and human. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Pinecrest. Montana sat nestled against the jagged edges of Glacier National Park like a scar against pristine skin. Once a thriving logging town, its 1,800 residents now survived primarily on tourism and what little industry remained after the mill closed. Main Street featured the expected assortment of weathered storefronts, a diner, hardware store, small grocery, and the Pinewood Tavern, where secrets flowed as freely as the cheap whiskey. Winter transformed Pinecrest into an isolated island of humanity. The nearest substantial town was over 60 miles away, and when heavy snows came, that distance might as well have been 1,000. This isolation bred both community resilience and a troubling ability to keep matters in-house. Lily Harper hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since her mother's funeral 3 weeks ago. The car accident had left her not just motherless, but seemingly voiceless. Her small world shattered into fragments no adult could properly reassemble. What no one understood was that Lily's silence wasn't emptiness but observation. She watched everything with eyes that missed nothing, especially when it came to animals. Last summer, she'd nursed a fallen robin back to health when everyone said it would die. When her neighbor's cat went missing, Lily had found it trapped in an abandoned well. Animals spoke a language Lily understood better than human words, especially now that her mother's voice was gone forever. Walter Montgomery hadn't seen his granddaughter since she was 3. The rift between him and his daughter Sarah had been too deep, too jagged to mend before her death. Now, at 68, the retired veterinarian found himself responsible for a traumatized 7-year-old who was essentially a stranger. His weathered hands, once steady enough to perform delicate surgeries on injured wildlife, now trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. Ryan Mitchell had volunteered to drive Lily to Pinecrest as a family friend, though his connection to the Harpers seemed vague at best. Handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and watchful eyes, Ryan claimed to have worked with Sarah at the Glacier Observer newspaper. Yet something in his manner, the way he constantly checked the rearview mirror, how his hand occasionally drifted toward his hip suggested a man accustomed to looking over his shoulder. The northern landscape mirrored Lily's internal state, harsh, unforgiving, beautiful in its desolation. Walter's truck door flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped. The bitter cold assaulted him instantly, stealing his breath as effectively as a punch to the sternum. "Lily, stay in the truck," he shouted, but the girl had already scrambled out her side, pink snow boots plunging into a drift nearly to her knees. The German Shepherd lay partially covered in snow, its dark fur matted with ice and what Walter immediately recognized as dried blood. The dog had been deliberately tied to the pine tree with a coarse rope that had frozen into the fur around its neck. From the sunken abdomen and protruding ribs, Walter estimated it had been without food for at least a week, maybe longer. As Walter approached cautiously, his trained eye catalogued the animal's injuries with growing horror and rage. Beyond the obvious starvation and exposure, the dog bore evidence of systematic torture. One ear was partially missing, leaving a jagged scar that continued down to its neck. Burns marked its muzzle, likely from a cigarette. Most disturbing were the circular wounds on its chest and legs, puncture marks that matched the pattern of fighting dogs trained to hold and tear. "God Almighty," Walter murmured, kneeling beside the animal. Snow soaked through his jeans immediately, but he barely noticed. The dog's breathing was shallow and labored, each exhale producing a small cloud that dissipated too quickly in the frigid air. Lily dropped to her knees on the opposite side, seemingly oblivious to the cold. Her small hand reached out slowly, hovering inches from the dog's head. Walter opened his mouth to warn her injured animals were unpredictable, dangerous, but stopped when the dog's eyes flickered open. They were amber, clouded with pain, but startlingly intelligent. The animal made no aggressive move toward Lily's outstretched hand, just watched her with an exhausted resignation that was somehow more heartbreaking than fear would have been. "We need to get him free," Lily said, her voice clear and commanding despite having barely spoken for weeks. "Do you have a knife?" Walter nodded, pulling out his pocket knife. The rope had frozen solid, and his fingers ached as he sawed through the fibers. Lily pressed her small body against the dog's side, trying to share what little warmth she could. Her tears fell silently onto the animal's fur, creating tiny melted droplets that immediately began to refreeze. "You're going to be okay," she whispered into the dog's ear. "I promise. I'm not leaving you here." The rope finally gave way under Walter's knife, releasing the dog from its frozen prison. Walter immediately wrapped his own coat around the animal, his decades of veterinary experience taking over. "He's hypothermic and dehydrated," he said, mostly to himself. "Possible internal injuries. We need to get him warmed gradually or the shock could kill him." Carefully, Walter slid his arms beneath the large dog. He was surprised at how light it felt, clearly severely undernourished, its muscle mass diminished. The dog's head lolled against his shoulder, its eyes barely opening as Walter lifted it from its snowy grave. "Come on, Lily. Back to the truck. Fast." The wind had intensified, driving the snow horizontally into their faces. By the time they reached the vehicle, Walter's arms ached, and Lily's face had gone alarmingly red from the biting wind. He managed to open the rear door and gently laid the German Shepherd across the back seat. "Crank the heat," Walter instructed as he climbed behind the wheel, his fingers fumbling to restart the engine. "But not too high. We need to warm him gradually." As the truck's heater slowly came to life, Walter reached under the seat and pulled out an emergency medical kit, one of many habits from his veterinary days he'd never abandoned. He handed Lily a thermal blanket. "Wrap him in this, but gently. Don't rub him, that could damage his tissues." With surprising knowledge for a child her age, Lily carefully arranged the blanket around the dog. leaving his head uncovered. She stroked his head with feather-light touches, her small face a mask of concentration. "His name is Shadow," she said suddenly. Walter glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What? His name?" Lily repeated, not looking up from the dog. "It's Shadow. How do you know that?" Walter asked, shifting the truck into drive. Lily didn't answer. Instead, she leaned close to the dog's ear and whispered something Walter couldn't hear. To his astonishment, the dog's tail moved just the faintest twitch against the seat, but unmistakable. As Walter navigated the snowy road toward his cabin, his mind raced. In 40 years of veterinary practice, he'd seen animals abused in countless ways. But this was different. The methodical nature of the injuries, the deliberate placement far from town where the dog would suffer a slow, agonizing death. This wasn't a case of neglect or casual cruelty. Someone had wanted this animal to suffer, and they'd wanted no witnesses. Walter's cabin stood a quarter-mile back from the main road, sheltered by a stand of ancient pines that groaned under their burden of snow. The weathered structure had once been a hunting lodge, renovated over decades to serve as both home and veterinary clinic before Walter's retirement 5 years ago. As he pulled up to the covered porch, the motion-activated lights flickered to life, illuminating the falling snow in golden shafts. "We need to get him inside quickly," Walter said, already moving to the back door. "My clinic's in the basement." Lily nodded, her eyes never leaving Shadow as Walter carefully lifted the dog from the back seat. The animal's breathing had grown more labored during the drive, each inhale a strained wheeze that worried Walter deeply. Inside, the warmth of the cabin enveloped them, the wood stove in the corner casting an orange glow across the rustic interior. Walter carried Shadow through the living room to a door beside the kitchen, nudging it open with his foot to reveal a staircase. "Flip that light switch," he instructed Lily, who scrambled ahead of him. The basement clinic was a startling contrast to the homey cabin above. Sterile white walls, stainless steel examination table, and cabinets of medical equipment spoke to Walter's professional past. He gently laid Shadow on the table, immediately reaching for an IV stand and fluids. "Hand me that warming blanket, the electric one, in the cabinet," Walter directed, falling easily into the commanding tone of a doctor with an assistant. If Lily noticed the change in his demeanor, she didn't comment, simply retrieved the blanket and helped position it under Shadow. For the next hour, Walter worked methodically to save the dog's life. He inserted an IV to deliver fluids and antibiotics, cleaned the visible wounds, and checked for internal injuries with gentle, probing fingers. Through it all, Lily remained at Shadow's head, one small hand resting lightly between his ears, whispering continuous reassurances that seemed to calm the animal despite his pain. When Walter finally stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel, exhaustion lined his face. "I've done what I can for now. He's severely dehydrated, malnourished, and has multiple infected wounds. The next 24 hours will be critical." Lily looked up, her eyes fierce in her small face. "He'll make it. He's strong." Walter studied his granddaughter with new interest. After weeks of near silence, the appearance of this dog had transformed her. He noticed something clutched in her other hand, Shadow's collar, which Walter had removed to better assess the neck wounds. "What's that you've got?" he asked, reaching for the collar. Lily reluctantly handed it over. The leather was worn and cracked, but still bore a small metal tag partially obscured by dried mud. Walter rubbed it clean with his thumb, then froze as the engraving became visible. Shadow, MWD Unit 8406, Handler, CPT, J. Calloway. "Military working dog," Walter muttered, turning the tag over to reveal a serial number and blood type. This dog was a soldier. He looked at Shadow with new understanding. The disciplined way the animal had remained still during treatment, his stoic endurance of pain, these weren't just traits of a good-natured pet. This was a highly trained military canine. "Someone tried to kill him," Lily said, her voice small but certain. "Because he knows things." Walter glanced sharply at his granddaughter. "What kind of things?" "Lily." Instead of answering, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Carefully smoothing it against her leg before handing it to Walter, it was a sketch, drawn with the unrefined but expressive hand of a child. It showed Shadow tied to a post, surrounded by other dogs in various states of distress. In the background loomed shadowy human figures, one holding what appeared to be a weapon. "When did you draw this?" Walter asked, unnerved by the disturbing image. "Just now, while you were fixing his leg." Lily stroked Shadow's muzzle gently. "He showed me." Before Walter could question this bizarre statement, a sharp knock at the cabin door upstairs made them both jump. Shadow's ears instantly pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest despite his weakened state. "Stay here," Walter ordered, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. He climbed the stairs and crossed to the front window, peering through the frost-edged glass. A police SUV sat in his driveway, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Walter pulled open the door to find Sheriff Benjamin Hayes on his porch, snow dusting the shoulders of his tan uniform. At 50, Hayes was still powerfully built, with the weathered face of a man who spent most of his time outdoors and eyes that revealed nothing. "Evening, Doc," Hayes said, removing his hat. "Got a report about a vehicle stopped on County Road 16 during the storm. Checking to make sure everything's all right." Walter hesitated. Something in Hayes's overly casual tone set off warning bells. "Everything's fine, Sheriff. Had a flat tire, that's all." Hayes nodded, but his gaze drifted past Walter into the cabin. "That Mitchell fellow still with you? Thought I saw his truck earlier." "He dropped Lily off and headed back to town," Walter replied, positioning himself more firmly in the doorway. "Weather's getting worse. You might want to get back before the roads are impassable." "Might at that." Hayes settled his hat back on his head but made no move to leave. "Heard anything unusual out this way recently? Any strangers or odd vehicles?" "Can't say I have. Pretty quiet out here, especially in winter." Hayes studied Walter's face for a long moment. "Well, if you do notice anything out of the ordinary, you be sure to call it in. Lots of valuable property out here in the woods. Things can go missing." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Walter forced a neutral expression. "I'll keep that in mind." "You do that?" Hayes turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Walter, give my regards to your granddaughter. Terrible thing about Sarah. Just terrible." Walter watched the sheriff's SUV retreat down his driveway, unease settling like a stone in his stomach. How had Hayes known about a stopped vehicle on a remote county road during a blizzard? Who would have been out there to report it? And why the pointed mention of Ryan Mitchell? When Walter returned to the basement, he found Lily curled up beside Shadow on a blanket on the floor, both of them asleep. The dog's massive head rested on her small lap. his breathing steadier now. Walter watched them for a moment, struck by how natural they looked together, as if they'd known each other for years rather than hours. Whatever Shadow knew, whatever someone had tried to silence by leaving him to die in the snow, Walter was now certain of one thing: his granddaughter was somehow bound up in it too. Dawn broke reluctantly over Pinecrest, the sun a pale suggestion behind heavy clouds that promised more snow. Walter stood at his kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hand as he watched the white landscape for any sign of movement. He'd slept poorly, his dreams haunted by the image of Shadow tied to that tree, and the unsettling visit from Sheriff Hayes downstairs. Shadow had made it through the night, a minor miracle given his condition. The antibiotics seemed to be working. His fever had broken around 3 a.m., and the swelling around his worst wounds had subsided slightly. Lily had refused to leave his side. Finally, falling asleep on the cot Walter kept in the clinic for overnight animal patients. The sound of tires crunching on snow pulled Walter from his thoughts. He tensed, setting down his coffee and moving to the front window. A battered Jeep Cherokee was making its way up his drive, its chains providing just enough traction in the deep snow. Walter recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Dr. Rebecca Collins, Pinecrest's only physician. He opened the door before she could knock, the cold air rushing in around him. Rebecca stood on his porch, her auburn hair partially concealed by a knit cap, medical bag in hand. At 42, she had the confident bearing of someone comfortable with emergencies and the compassionate eyes of a doctor who hadn't yet become hardened to suffering. "Walter," she greeted him with a nod. "May I come in?" He stepped aside, suddenly conscious of his rumpled appearance. "Bit early for house calls, isn't it? This isn't exactly official." Rebecca stamped snow from her boots before entering. "Ryan Mitchell came to the clinic last night. Said you might need some supplies." She lifted her medical bag. "I brought antibiotics, plasma expanders, and morphine." Walter's eyes narrowed. "How did he know what I needed?" "He didn't specify. Just said you had a special patient that couldn't go to a regular vet." She studied Walter's face. "Want to tell me what's going on?" Walter hesitated, then gestured toward the basement door. "Better show you." Rebecca followed him down the stairs, her expression changing from curiosity to shock as she took in the scene. Lily curled beside the massive German shepherd, both still sleeping, and the extent of the dog's injuries now visible in the harsh clinic lights. "My God," she whispered, instinctively moving closer to examine Shadow. "Who would do this?" "That's what I'd like to know," Walter replied quietly. "Found him tied to a tree out on County Road 16 yesterday evening. Would have died within hours if Lily hadn't spotted him." Rebecca knelt beside the dog, her practiced hands gently assessing his condition. "These aren't random injuries, Walter. The pattern here." She indicated the circular wounds on Shadow's chest. "I've seen this before." "Dogfighting," Walter supplied. "But there's more. Check his collar tag." She carefully turned the metal tag. Reading the military identification, her eyebrows rose. "A military working dog out here, apparently, and someone went to considerable trouble to make him disappear." Rebecca sat back on her heels, troubled. "Walter, this is the third case of extreme animal abuse I've seen in 2 months. There was a retriever found in Thompson's Creek with similar fighting wounds, and Mrs. Holloway's cat was returned to her porch with its paws burned." "Returned?" Walter frowned. "Someone took it first." took it, heard it, then brought it back, like they were sending a message. Rebecca lowered her voice, glancing at the still sleeping Lily. I reported it to Hayes, but he said it was probably just kids being cruel. Walter snorted. Kids don't return animals they've tortured. They're not trying to communicate. The implications hung heavily between them. Someone in Pinecrest was systematically abusing animals, and now a military dog with potentially sensitive training had been targeted. A small voice interrupted their thoughts. He wasn't the only one. They turned to find Lily awake, her hand still resting protectively on Shadow's flank. The dog's eyes were open too, tracking their movements with an alertness that surprised Walter given his condition. "What do you mean, honey?" Rebecca asked gently. Instead of answering, Lily reached for her backpack, which Walter had brought down for her the night before. She pulled out a sketchbook and opened it to a page covered in childish but disturbingly detailed drawings. They showed multiple dogs in cages, some with injuries similar to Shadow's. In the background was a building with what appeared to be a barn or large shed attached. "Shadow showed me," Lily said simply, turning to another page that depicted men exchanging money while dogs fought in a pit. They make them fight. The ones that lose get punished. Walter and Rebecca exchanged troubled glances. "Lily," Walter began carefully, "how do you know this?" "I told you. Shadow showed me." She looked up at them with complete certainty. "He remembers everything." Before Walter could probe further, Shadow suddenly raised his head, ears alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his attention fixed on the stairs. Seconds later, they heard the front door open and close. "Walter!" Ryan Mitchell's voice called from above. "It's Ryan. Dr. Collins said she was heading out here." Shadow's growl intensified, and he struggled to rise despite his injuries. Lily placed a restraining hand on his neck, whispering something in his ear that seemed to calm him slightly. "Down here," Walter called, moving protectively closer to Lily and Shadow. Ryan appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his expression neutral until he saw Shadow fully alert and watching him. Something flashed in his eyes, recognition, Walter thought, before it was masked behind casual concern. "So that's the dog you found," Ryan said, remaining by the stairs. "Looks like he's doing better." "No thanks to whoever left him to die," Walter replied, studying Ryan carefully. "Military working dog, according to his tags. Strange coincidence, him turning up out here." Ryan's face betrayed nothing. "Mind if I take a look at those tags?" "Actually, I do mind." Walter moved to stand between Ryan and the dog. "What's your interest in him, exactly?" A tense silence filled the room, broken only by Shadow's low, continuous growl. Rebecca glanced between the two men, sensing the undercurrent of hostility. "Maybe I should take Lily upstairs for some breakfast," she suggested, reaching for the girl's hand. "No," Lily said firmly, pulling away. "I'm staying with Shadow." Ryan sighed, then reached slowly into his pocket. Shadow tensed, but the man withdrew only a folded photograph, which he handed to Walter. It showed a younger Ryan in military fatigues, arm around another man who looked strikingly similar. Between them sat Shadow, alert and proud in a tactical K9 vest. "That's my brother Nathan, Shadow's first handler before Captain Calloway," Ryan explained. "Shadow disappeared during a training exercise 2 years ago. Nathan was devastated, blamed himself. He's been looking for Shadow ever since." Walter studied the photograph. The resemblance between the brothers was strong, but something about the story didn't add up. If Shadow went missing during training, why wasn't it reported his tags still list Calloway as his handler? It was reported, Ryan replied, a shadow crossing his face. But there were complications. Nathan was discharged shortly after. Shadow was officially listed as killed in action. But he wasn't, Walter observed. He was brought here to Pinecrest. Apparently, Ryan's gaze shifted to Shadow, whose growl had subsided to watchful wariness. The question is why? And by whom? The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching outside. Walter moved quickly to the small basement window. A familiar tan SUV was pulling into his driveway. "Sheriff's back," he said grimly. "Rebecca, take Lily upstairs. Act normal." He turned to Ryan. "You too." Not a word about Shadow's military background. As they ascended the stairs, Walter caught Lily's eye. "Stay with Dr. Collins," he instructed. "And remember, Shadow is just a stray dog we found." "Nothing special," Lily nodded solemnly, but the intelligence in her eyes told Walter she understood far more than a 7-year-old should about the situation. Sheriff Hayes didn't bother knocking this time. Walter opened the door to find him already on the porch, 2 deputies flanking him. "Morning, Doc," Hayes said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Need to have a word with you about that animal you picked up yesterday." Walter feigned confusion. "The stray. What about him?" "Got a report from a property owner out on County Road 16. Says his dog went missing a few days ago. German Shepherd. No collar." Hayes looked past Walter to where Ryan and Rebecca stood in the living room. "Morning, Mitchell, Doc Collins. Quite the gathering." "Sheriff," Ryan acknowledged with a nod. "Just checking on Lily, making sure she's settling in okay." Hayes's gaze drifted to Lily, who stood half-hidden behind Rebecca. "And how are you finding Pinecrest? Young lady getting acquainted with our little town?" Lily didn't answer, her face expressionless as she stared at the sheriff. "She's still adjusting," Walter said, drawing Hayes's attention back to him. "About this dog who's claiming ownership." "Nathan Mitchell," Hayes replied, watching Ryan's face carefully. "Says his purebred shepherd escaped during the snowstorm 2 days ago. Valuable animal, apparently." Walter felt rather than saw Ryan stiffen. "Nathan's in Pinecrest," Ryan asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Moved back about 6 months ago," Hayes confirmed. "Working security at the Elkhorn Lodge. Said you knew he was here." "Must have slipped his mind to mention it," Ryan replied. Walter's mind worked rapidly. Nathan Mitchell, Shadow's former handler, conveniently living in Pinecrest and now claiming ownership of a dog that had been deliberately tortured and left to die. It strained coincidence well past breaking point. "Well, I'd be happy to return the dog to its rightful owner," Walter said slowly. "But he's in pretty bad shape. Someone worked him over pretty good before he went missing. Cigarette burns, knife wounds, signs of being used as bait in dogfights." Hayes's expression didn't change. "That's so. Well, I'm sure Nathan will want to know who did that to his property." "I'd like to speak with Nathan myself," Walter insisted. "Professional courtesy from one dog owner to another. If he can describe Shadow's injuries before seeing him, I'll know he's telling the truth." A flicker of annoyance crossed Hayes's face. I don't think that's necessary. Doc, Nathan's ID should be sufficient. It's not, Walter said firmly. That dog was deliberately tortured. I want to be damn sure I'm not handing him back to the person who did it. Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Montgomery, it's just a dog. Hand it over. No. The word came not from Walter, but from Lily, who had moved to stand beside her grandfather. Her small face was set with determination beyond her years. Shadow stays with me. Hayes looked down at the child, surprise briefly replacing his intimidating demeanor. Shadow, that's not the dog's name. Little girl. Yes, it is, Lily insisted. And he's not going anywhere. A tense silence fell. Walter placed a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. Feeling her trembling beneath his touch, not from fear, he realized, but from anger. You have 48 hours, Hayes finally said, his voice cold. Either produce the animal or face charges for theft of property valued over $5,000. He turned to leave, then added over his shoulder, And Walter, I'd be careful about the company you keep. Some folks in town might get the wrong idea. As the sheriff's vehicle pulled away, Walter turned to Ryan, no longer bothering to hide his suspicion. You want to tell me what's really going on, why your brother, who supposedly loved this dog, is working with a sheriff who doesn't seem the least bit concerned about animal torture. Ryan's face was grim. It's complicated. Uncomplicated, Walter demanded. Because right now I've got a severely injured military dog, a traumatized granddaughter who somehow knows things she shouldn't, and a sheriff making veiled threats. So start talking. Ryan glanced at Rebecca, then Lily, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Not here, he finally said. Not with Lily listening. I need to hear it too, Lily said quietly. Shadow wants me to know. The adults stared at the small girl, her certainty unnerving in its completeness. Walter felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Whatever was happening in Pinecrest went beyond animal cruelty. Whatever Shadow had witnessed, whatever he knew, was dangerous enough that someone had tried to kill him for it. And now that same danger might be closing in on all of them. Ryan Mitchell closed all the blinds before speaking. The cabin, once cozy, now felt like a fortress under siege as the four of them gathered in Walter's living room. Shadow had insisted on following Lily upstairs despite his injuries, and now lay vigilant at her feet, his amber eyes never leaving Ryan. I'm not who I said I was, Ryan began, his voice low. Or rather, not entirely. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open to reveal a badge. Special Agent Ryan Mitchell, ATF. I've been undercover in this region for 14 months. Walter stared at the badge, then at Ryan. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. What the hell does that have to do with a military dog? Nothing, directly. My investigation targets an interstate weapons trafficking operation, but about 6 months ago, we discovered its connection to an illegal dog fighting circuit that spans 3 states. Ryan's gaze shifted to Shadow. High-stakes gambling, mostly. 6-figure bets on a single fight. Rebecca leaned forward. And Shadow was never my brother's dog. Ryan's admission hung in the air. Nathan is my half-brother, and he is in Pinecrest. But the rest was a cover story. The photograph is authentic. Nathan did work with military dogs, but he was discharged dishonorably 3 years ago for selling military equipment on the black market. His expression hardened. He's now one of the principal trainers in the dogfighting operation. Yeah, Walter felt a cold fury building in his chest. You're telling me your own brother tortures animals for profit? Yes. Ryan's blunt answer left no room for sentiment. And Shadow here is something of a legend in those circles, a military-trained German shepherd who disappeared 2 years ago, rumored to have been acquired by someone with connections. He looked directly at Shadow. They've been using him as a breeding stud and occasionally forcing him to fight. According to my sources, he's never lost a match until last week. Lily's small hand clutched Shadow's fur. They hurt him because he wouldn't fight anymore, she said with certainty. He stopped when he recognized someone. Ryan's head snapped toward Lily. What did you say? Shadow recognized someone at the last fight, someone he knew from before. Lily met Ryan's gaze unflinchingly. That's why they tried to kill him. He knows who they really are. A heavy silence followed her words. Walter glanced from his granddaughter to Shadow, unsettled by the inexplicable connection between them. How could Lily possibly know any of this? Lily, Rebecca said gently, how do you know what happened to Shadow? The girl shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. He tells me, not with words, but with pictures, in my head. Walter might have dismissed it as a child's imagination, but Shadow's attentive focus on Lily suggested something more. The dog watched her with an intelligence that seemed almost human, responding to her statements with subtle changes in posture and expression. Is that possible? Walter asked Ryan. Could the dog have recognized someone from his military past? Ryan considered this. Military working dogs are trained to recognize and remember dozens of specific individuals. If Shadow encountered someone from his unit at that fight, he trailed off, implications hanging heavy in the air. Who would that be? Rebecca pressed. And why would they be involved in dogfighting in Montana? That's what I need to find out. Ryan walked to the window and peered through the blinds. But first, we need to secure Shadow. If Nathan discovers he's alive and with people who understand his significance, none of you will be safe. Walter moved to stand beside his granddaughter, his protective instinct flaring. We're not giving him up. I'm not suggesting that, Ryan clarified. But we need a safer location. Hayes will be back, probably with a warrant. Walter's mind raced through possibilities. There's my old hunting cabin up near Whitefish Lake. It's isolated, accessible only by snowmobile this time of year. Hayes doesn't know about it. I bought it under my late wife's maiden name. Ryan nodded approvingly. That could work. When can we move? Today, before the next storm hits. Walter turned to Rebecca. We'll need medical supplies for Shadow. I can help with that, she agreed. But I can't come with you. I'm the only doctor for 20 miles. People would notice my absence immediately. You should stay in town anyway, Ryan advised. Maintain your routine. If anyone asks, Walter took Lily to Missoula to shop for school supplies. Make it convincing. As they discussed logistics, Lily had moved to the kitchen table, sketching intently in her notebook. Shadow limped after her, positioning himself where he could see both her and the adults. There's something else, Walter said, lowering his voice. Something I haven't told you about Sarah Lily's mother. Rebecca and Ryan turned to him with identical expressions of concern. Sarah was an investigative journalist, Walter continued. She was working on a story before her accident. She wouldn't tell me details, but she mentioned dogfighting rings connected to missing persons cases. His voice grew strained. I dismissed it as sensationalism. We argued about it the last time we spoke. Rebecca placed a comforting hand on Walter's arm. You couldn't have known, Walter. Couldn't I? Bitterness edged his words. Sarah's accident happened on Ravine Road, a route she knew like the back of her hand. Her brakes failed on a clear, dry night. No witnesses. His eyes found Ryan's. Sound familiar to any other convenient accidents around here? Ryan's expression confirmed Walter's suspicions. 3 witnesses to illegal activities have died in vehicle accidents in the past 18 months. We couldn't prove foul play. My daughter was murdered, Walter stated flatly. And I think it was because of what she discovered about this operation. The revelation settled heavily in the room. Lily continued drawing, seemingly oblivious to the conversation. But Shadow's ears had pricked forward, his attention unwavering. We need to move quickly. Ryan decided. If they connect Shadow to you, and you to Sarah's investigation. He was interrupted by Lily, who had approached with her sketchbook. She opened it to a detailed drawing of a man in hunting gear standing beside a distinctive black truck with a custom grill guard. The man's face was rendered with surprising accuracy for a child's drawing. This is the man Shadow recognized, she announced, holding up the sketch. Ryan took the drawing, his expression darkening. Are you sure? Lily, she nodded solemnly. Shadow is sure. Ryan showed the sketch to Walter and Rebecca. Recognize him. Walter shook his head, but Rebecca inhaled sharply. That's Nathaniel Pierce. He owns the Elkhorn Lodge and half the commercial property in Pinecrest. And, Ryan added grimly, he's a former Army Ranger who served in the same unit that trained Shadow. He's also the principal financial backer of our weapons trafficking operation, though we've never been able to prove it. He studied Lily with new respect. Your drawing just connected him directly to illegal dogfighting. That's more than we've managed in 14 months of investigation. Walter felt a chill. Nathaniel Pierce was one of the most powerful men in the county, wealthy, politically connected, and universally respected for his charitable contributions to the community. If Pierce recognized Shadow at that fight, Ryan continued, he would have ordered him eliminated immediately. A dog trained to identify specific individuals is a liability he couldn't afford. Then we have proof, Walter said. Shadow is living evidence. A dog can't testify in court, Ryan reminded him. We need documentation, financial records, witnesses willing to talk. He glanced at Shadow. But yes, he's the key to everything. And Pierce knows it. A sudden, sharp bark from Shadow brought everyone to attention. The dog had moved to the front window, his posture rigid despite his injuries. Walter edged to the window and peered out. A black pickup with a custom grill guard was making its way slowly past the cabin. Pierce, he whispered. He's watching the place. Ryan was immediately in motion. We need to leave now. Forget packing, just grab essential medications for Shadow and whatever Lily needs. Use the back door and head for the tree line. I'll create a diversion to draw attention away from you. Walter hesitated. What kind of diversion? The kind that buys you time. Ryan checked his sidearm, which had been concealed beneath his jacket. Rebecca, you leave first. drive straight to the clinic like nothing's wrong. Walter, get Shadow and Lily to that cabin. I'll contact you through Rebecca when it's safe." As Rebecca gathered her things, Ryan pulled Walter aside. "There's a burner phone in my glove compartment. The code to unlock it is 8416, Shadow's unit number. Use it only in emergencies." Walter nodded, suddenly aware of how quickly their situation had deteriorated. What had begun as an animal rescue had escalated into a life-threatening conspiracy involving weapons trafficking, organized crime, and possibly his daughter's murder. Lily appeared beside him, her small backpack already on her shoulders, Shadow standing protectively at her side despite his weakened condition. Her face showed neither fear nor confusion, only resolute determination that reminded Walter painfully of Sarah. "We're ready, Grandpa," she said simply. The quiet confidence in her voice steadied him. Whatever was coming, they would face it together, an unlikely trio bound by circumstance and Shadow's mysterious past. What none of them noticed was the faint blinking light beneath Shadow's thick fur, a microchip transmitter that had just been activated remotely, broadcasting their location to someone who had never intended to let the dog disappear. The forest behind Walter's cabin offered protection in its density. Ancient pines stood like sentinels, their snow-laden branches creating a natural canopy that partially obscured the morning sky. Walter led the way, blazing a trail through knee-deep snow, occasionally glancing back to check on Lily and Shadow. The girl moved with surprising agility for her age, but Shadow's progress worried him. The dog's injuries clearly pained him with each labored step, yet he refused to falter, his military training evident in his determination. They had escaped just in time. As they'd slipped out the back door, Walter had glimpsed Pierce's black truck pulling into his driveway. Minutes later, the distant sound of raised voices confirmed that Ryan's diversion was underway. "We need to rest," Walter announced after nearly an hour of trudging through the wilderness. They had reached a small clearing where a fallen pine created a natural shelter, its massive trunk providing a windbreak against the biting cold. Just for a few minutes, Lily immediately knelt beside Shadow, who had collapsed into the snow, his breathing rapid and shallow. Blood had seeped through the bandages on his chest, leaving crimson stains on the white ground beneath him. "He's hurting, Grandpa," Lily said, her voice tight with concern. "And he's afraid." Walter knelt to examine Shadow, his trained hands gently probing the dog's wounds. The exertion had reopened several injuries, and the dog's temperature felt dangerously elevated. The medications in Walter's hastily packed bag would help, but what Shadow truly needed was rest and proper care, neither of which they could provide during their desperate flight through the wilderness. "Let me give him something for the pain," Walter said, preparing a syringe from his medical kit. As he administered the injection, Shadow watched him with those unnervingly intelligent eyes, never flinching from the needle. "He understands you're helping him," Lily observed, stroking the dog's head. "He's been through worse than this." The casual certainty in her voice troubled Walter. What 7-year-old spoke that way about suffering? Yet as he watched her with Shadow, he couldn't deny their extraordinary connection. The dog responded to her touch in a way that defied explanation, his tense muscles relaxing beneath her small hands. "Lily," Walter began cautiously, "this connection you have with Shadow, can you explain it to me? How do you know what he's thinking?" She considered this, her brow furrowing in concentration. "It's like, When I look at him, I can see pictures, like memories, but not mine. They just appear in my head." She met Walter's skeptical gaze directly. Mom could do it too. She called it being animal sensitive, said it ran in the family. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold ran through Walter. Sarah had indeed possessed an uncanny ability with animals from childhood, understanding their needs and behavior in ways that had sometimes unnerved him. He had attributed it to keen observation and natural empathy, not whatever inexplicable bond Lily was describing. "What does Shadow show you?" he asked, curiosity overcoming his skepticism. "Bad things, mostly," Lily admitted, her voice small. "Men hurting him, making him fight other dogs. A dark room with cages." She closed her eyes briefly. "But also before, when he was a soldier. He was happy then. He had a purpose." Walter absorbed this, unsure how to respond. Whatever the explanation for Lily's insight's imagination, trauma response, or something truly inexplicable, her information about Shadow had proven accurate thus far. "Does he show you anything about the man in the truck, Nathaniel Pierce?" Lily's expression darkened. "Shadow hates him. He smells like death." Before Walter could probe further, Shadow suddenly raised his head, ears alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he struggled to his feet, facing back the way they had come. "Someone's following us," Lily whispered, instantly alert. Walter strained to hear any sound beyond the soft sigh of wind through the pines. Nothing. But Shadow's rigid posture and fixed attention suggested the dog sensed something beyond human perception. "We need to keep moving," Walter decided, quickly repacking his medical kit. "The cabin is still 4 miles north. If we push hard, we can make it by nightfall." They resumed their journey, moving faster now despite Shadow's condition. Walter led them deeper into the forest, away from any established trails, using his knowledge of the land to carve a path that would be difficult to follow. The afternoon sun, already low in the winter sky, cast long shadows through the trees, creating disorienting patterns of light and dark across the snow. After another hour of grueling progress, they crested a small rise, and Walter caught his first glimpse of Whitefish Lake in the distance, its frozen surface gleaming like polished silver in the fading light. "Almost there," he encouraged Lily, whose small face showed signs of exhaustion despite her determined silence. "The cabin is just beyond that ridge." Shadow, who had been lagging behind, suddenly collapsed. His legs simply gave out, sending him sprawling into the snow with a pained whimper that wrenched Walter's heart. Lily was instantly at his side, tears streaming down her face as she cradled the dog's massive head. "Grandpa, he can't go any further," she pleaded. "He's too sick." Walter knelt beside them, assessing Shadow with growing alarm. The dog's breathing had become labored and irregular, his pulse weak and rapid beneath Walter's fingers. Fever radiated from his body despite the freezing temperature, suggesting infection had taken hold in his wounds. "He needs antibiotics and fluids," Walter said grimly. "More than what I brought with us." Lily looked up at him, her eyes fierce through her tears. "Then we have to call Dr. Rebecca. Shadow will die without help." The stark reality of their situation hit Walter like a physical blow. They were miles from anywhere, with a critically ill dog who couldn't continue, and night falling rapidly. Using Ryan's phone would risk revealing their location. But what choice did they have? Stay with him, Walter instructed. moving several yards away before reluctantly withdrawing the burner phone from his pocket. He dialed Rebecca's private number, praying she would answer. "Montgomery Veterinary?" Rebecca's voice answered cautiously after 3 rings. "It's Walter," he said quickly. "I need your help. Shadow's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Fever, labored breathing, possible sepsis from his wounds." A pause. Then Rebecca's voice lowered. "I can't talk freely. The clinic is being watched. Sheriff Hayes and one of Pierce's men have been asking questions about you all day." Walter's heart sank. "Rebecca, Shadow won't make it without proper medical intervention. We're still miles from the cabin." "Where exactly are you?" she asked, her tone shifting to professional efficiency. "The North Ridge above Whitefish Lake. About half a mile from the old fire watch tower." "I know it," she confirmed. "I can be there in 2 hours with supplies, but you'll need to stabilize him in the meantime. Do you have any antibiotics left?" "1 dose," Walter replied, mentally inventorying his depleted medical kit. "Give it to him now. Then find shelter and try to control his temperature. I'll bring everything else." Walter ended the call, a new urgency driving him as he returned to Lily and Shadow. The dog's condition had worsened in just the few minutes he'd been gone, his breathing now accompanied by a concerning rattle. "Doctor, Rebecca is coming," he told Lily, already preparing the last antibiotic injection. "But we need to find shelter and keep Shadow warm until she gets here." The abandoned fire watch tower was their best option, a relic from the 1950s that had been decommissioned decades ago but still stood on the ridge overlooking the lake. Walter had used it occasionally during hunting trips and knew it offered basic shelter from the elements. Getting Shadow there presented another challenge entirely. The dog, now barely conscious, couldn't walk the remaining distance. Walter considered their limited options before removing his heavy coat and laying it flat on the snow. "Help me move him on to this," he instructed Lily. "We'll use it as a makeshift sled." Together, they maneuvered Shadow's limp form onto the coat. Walter fashioned a crude harness from the coat's sleeves, positioning it across his chest, with Lily's help steadying the sled from behind. Walter began the arduous task of dragging Shadow through the snow toward the watchtower. The final half-mile took over an hour, each step a battle against exhaustion and the rapidly descending darkness. By the time the watchtower's silhouette appeared against the twilight sky, Walter's muscles screamed in protest and his hands, exposed to the cold without his coat, had lost almost all sensation. The tower's wooden stairs groaned under their weight as Walter half-carried, half-dragged Shadow up to the small observation room at the top. The space was cramped but enclosed, its windows providing a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. Dust and cobwebs covered the few pieces of abandoned furniture, a desk, a broken chair, and an ancient radio console. "Help me clear a space," Walter instructed Lily, who immediately began pushing debris aside to make room for Shadow. They laid him on the relatively clean wooden floor, Walter's coat now serving as bedding. The dog's condition had deteriorated alarmingly during the journey, his breathing shallow and his pulse thready beneath Walter's probing fingers. "He's dying, isn't he?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady as she stroked Shadow's head. Walter couldn't bring himself to lie to her. His body is fighting hard, but the infection is overwhelming his system. "We need those medications, Doctor. Rebecca is bringing." Lily nodded, her expression solemn beyond her years. Then we just have to keep him alive until she gets here. She stretched out beside Shadow, pressing her small body against his side, her arms wrapped around his neck. "Stay with me," she whispered into his ear. "Please, stay with me." Walter watched them, a lump forming in his throat. In just 2 days, this dog had become Lily's lifeline, perhaps the only thing anchoring her after the traumatic loss of her mother. To lose Shadow now might shatter whatever fragile recovery had begun. As darkness enveloped the watchtower completely, Walter peered out at the moonlit forest, searching for any sign of Rebecca's approach. Instead, his blood froze as he caught a glimpse of movement among the trees below the unmistakable beam of flashlights sweeping through the underbrush, moving deliberately toward the tower. Rebecca wouldn't use lights, Walter realized with growing dread. She would know better than to announce her approach so blatantly. Someone else had found them. And Shadow, their living evidence against Nathaniel Pierce, was hovering at death's door. Walter extinguished the small flashlight they had been using, plunging the watchtower into darkness. "Lily," he whispered urgently, "stay down and keep quiet." She nodded, her face pale in the moonlight filtering through the windows. Rather than showing fear, her expression hardened with resolve as she positioned herself protectively in front of Shadow. The dog, despite his critical condition, seemed to sense the danger. His ears twitched feebly, and a weak rumble emanated from his chest, a ghost of his former threatening growl. Walter crept to the window facing the approaching lights, careful to remain in shadow. He counted 3 separate beams cutting through the darkness, moving in a coordinated search pattern that spoke of professional training. These weren't random hikers or Forest Service personnel. They were hunters. And Walter had no doubt about their quarry. The realization that Pierce's men had tracked them so quickly was chilling. Had they followed their trail through the snow, monitored Rebecca's phone, whatever the method, the result was the same. They were cornered in an indefensible position with nowhere to run. Walter's mind raced through their limited options. They could try to hide, but a thorough search of the small tower would quickly reveal them. They could attempt to flee, but Shadow couldn't move, and Walter wouldn't leave him behind. That left only one option: confrontation. His hand moved to the hunting knife sheathed at his belt, the only weapon he had grabbed during their hasty escape. Against multiple armed men, it offered little reassurance, but Walter was no stranger to desperate situations. Before retiring to Pinecrest, he had spent 5 years with Veterinarians Without Borders, working in conflict zones where protecting endangered animals often meant confronting armed poachers. He had killed once before, a fact that haunted his dreams, but had saved both his life and those of the mountain gorillas in his care. "Grandpa," Lily's whisper broke through his dark thoughts. "There's someone else out there." Walter looked where she was pointing, the opposite side of the tower, away from the approaching lights. At first, he saw nothing in the moonlit forest. Then, a shadow moved between the trees, a lone figure advancing quickly and silently toward the tower, keeping to the darkest patches of underbrush. Before Walter could determine if this newcomer represented help or additional danger, Shadow suddenly raised his head. The effort clearly cost him, but his eyes were alert for the first time in hours, fixed on the window where the solitary figure had been spotted. "It's okay," Lily whispered to the dog. "She's here to help." Walter shot his granddaughter a questioning look, but there was no time for explanations. The 3 searchers with flashlights had reached the base of the tower. The creak of the wooden stairs announced their ascent, each footfall deliberate and menacing in the silence. "Hide behind the desk," Walter instructed Lily, positioning himself near the door, knife in hand. She complied, dragging Shadow's nearly limp form with surprising strength for her small size. The footsteps stopped just outside the observation room's door. Walter pressed himself against the wall, muscles coiled in anticipation. When the door swung open, he would have one chance to disable the first intruder before the others reacted. "Montgomery!" a voice called through the door. "We know you're in there. We just want the dog. Send him out. And we can all walk away from this." Walter remained silent, controlling his breathing as he'd been taught during his time in Africa. The voice belonged to Nathan Mitchell Ryan's half-brother and the dogfighting trainer. The confirmation that Ryan's cover story had been at least partially true provided little comfort now. "Last chance," Nathan called. "The boss doesn't want to hurt the kid, but he will if he has to. The dog is all that matters." Walter glanced at Lily, expecting terror on her face. Instead, he found her smiling slightly, her hand resting on Shadow's head. She shook her head minutely, a signal to maintain silence. The door burst open. Walter lunged, driving his shoulder into the first man through a burly figure in hunting gear with a pistol half raised. The impact sent them both sprawling across the observation room floor, the gun skittering away into the darkness. Walter's momentary advantage ended as the second man entered, flashlight beam momentarily blinding him. He felt rather than saw the blow coming, a vicious strike to his kidney that sent him gasping to his knees. "Enough!" Nathan Mitchell stepped into the room, his lean face illuminated eerily from below by his flashlight. "Where's the dog?" Walter remained silent, positioning himself between the attackers and the desk where Lily and Shadow were hidden. The pain in his side blossomed with each breath, suggesting the blow had done significant damage. "Search the place," Nathan ordered the other men. "It's not big." The sound of breaking glass interrupted him, as every window in the observation room shattered simultaneously. A canister clattered across the wooden floor, immediately belching thick smoke that filled the small space with choking speed. Walter dropped to the floor, recognizing the tactical deployment of smoke grenades. Through streaming eyes, he glimpsed dark figures swinging through the broken windows, at least 3 of them, moving with military precision. Shouting erupted, followed by the sounds of struggle. Unable to see clearly through the smoke, Walter crawled toward where he had last seen Lily and Shadow. A hand gripped his shoulder firmly, and he spun to attack. "Easy, Doc." Ryan Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos. "Cavalry's here." As the smoke began to clear, Walter took in the scene with stunned disbelief. Nathan Mitchell and his men lay face down on the floor, zip-tied and subdued. Standing over them were Ryan and 2 other individuals in tactical gear, their movements suggesting professional law enforcement training. "FBI Tactical Unit," Ryan explained, helping Walter to his feet. "Called them in after Pierce showed up at your cabin. Figured the situation had escalated beyond my jurisdiction." "Lily," Walter gasped, still struggling to catch his breath. "Shadow, they're safe," a woman's voice interjected. Rebecca Collins emerged from behind the desk, medical bag in hand, already kneeling beside Shadow. "I was nearly to the tower when I spotted the search party. Doubled back to contact Ryan." Lily appeared beside Walter, throwing her arms around his waist with surprising force. "I knew they were coming," she said into his shirt. "Shadow told me to wait. That help was near." Walter embraced his granddaughter, relief washing over him in dizzying waves over her head. He watched Rebecca working on Shadow, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she inserted an IV catheter and administered what Walter recognized as broad-spectrum antibiotics and fluids. "Will he make it?" Walter asked, the question directed at both Rebecca and Lily. Rebecca's expression was guarded, but hopeful. "His condition is critical, but he's fighting hard. If we can get his fever under control and support his system through the infection, he has a chance." "He'll make it," Lily stated with absolute conviction. "He has to. He hasn't shown me everything yet." Ryan approached, holstering his weapon. "We need to move quickly. These three were just the advance team. Pierce will send more when they don't report back." "Pierce..." Walter's jaw tightened. "He's behind all of this. The dogfighting, the weapons trafficking, possibly my daughter's death." Ryan's expression confirmed Walter's suspicions. "We've been building a case against him for months, but couldn't get close enough. Shadow is the key, the living connection between Pierce's military past and his current criminal enterprises." Walter glanced at the dog, still clinging to life despite overwhelming odds. "And if Shadow dies, then our best evidence dies with him," Ryan admitted grimly. "And Pierce walks away clean again." The FBI agents had begun moving Nathan and his men down the tower stairs. Ryan gestured for Walter and Lily to follow. "We have a secure location prepared. Medical facilities, protection, everything Shadow needs." As they prepared to transport Shadow, Walter noticed something clutched in Lily's hand, a metal object she had removed from the dog's thick fur. "What's that?" he asked. Lily held it up, a sophisticated tracking device, now crushed and inoperable. "I found it on Shadow," she explained. "That's how they kept finding us." Walter exchanged glances with Ryan, a chill running through him despite the warmth of the tower. Someone had placed that device on Shadow after they had found him. Someone who had been in Walter's home or clinic. The betrayal cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. Shadow needed immediate medical attention, and they were still in danger as long as they remained in Pierce's territory. As they carried Shadow down the tower stairs, Walter noticed the dog's eyes were open, watching Lily with unwavering focus despite his weakened state. Whatever connection existed between them transcended normal understanding and might be their only advantage in the dangerous days to come. The safe house was a converted ranger station nestled in a remote valley 20 miles from Pinecrest. 2 FBI agents stood guard outside while inside. The main room had been transformed into a makeshift veterinary hospital. Shadow lay on an examination table, surrounded by monitoring equipment that beeped steadily in the background. IV lines delivered antibiotics and fluids to his weakened body. Walter worked alongside Rebecca, their movements synchronized after years of professional respect. They had been fighting for Shadow's life since arriving 6 hours earlier. The infection had taken a severe toll, but the dog's extraordinary will to survive, coupled with aggressive treatment, had finally stabilized his condition. Lily sat nearby, refusing to leave despite Walter's gentle attempts to make her rest. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, yet her focus never wavered from Shadow. She had maintained a continuous vigil, occasionally whispering in the dog's ear when his vitals showed signs of distress. "Fever's down 2 degrees, Rebecca announced, checking the digital thermometer. "Blood work shows the antibiotics are working. I think we've turned a corner." Walter nodded, allowing himself the first glimmer of cautious optimism. His breathing is more regular. If we can keep him stable for another 24 hours, I think he'll pull through." Lily's face brightened with vindication. "I told you he was strong." Ryan Mitchell entered, accompanied by a tall, stern-faced woman in a dark suit who carried herself with unmistakable authority. "Walter, this is Special Agent Diana Mercer, FBI Task Force Commander." Mercer surveyed the room with calculating eyes before settling her gaze on Shadow. "How soon before the dog can travel?" Walter bristled at her tone. "He has a name, Shadow, and he's not going anywhere for at least 3 days. He nearly died getting your evidence." "That evidence is the key to bringing down a criminal enterprise responsible for at least 11 deaths," Mercer countered. "Every hour we delay gives Pierce more time to cover his tracks." The tension in the room thickened, but before Walter could respond, Lily spoke up. "Shadow isn't just evidence," she said quietly, her voice somehow commanding the attention of every adult present. "He's a victim and a hero." Mercer's expression softened slightly as she regarded the exhausted child. "You must be Lily. Agent Mitchell told me how you found Shadow and helped save him." Lily nodded, her small hand resting protectively on Shadow's flank. "He saved us too. He fought when he could barely stand." Something shifted in Mercer's demeanor, a subtle acknowledgment of the bond between the child and the dog. "Ryan tells me you have a special way of understanding Shadow, that you know things about what happened to him." "I see what he remembers," Lily confirmed simply, as if stating an obvious fact. "It comes in pictures. Some are from when he was a military dog. Some are from the fighting pits." Her voice dropped. "Some are about my mom." Walter's head snapped up. "What about your mom?" Lily met her grandfather's gaze, her eyes wise beyond their years. "Shadow saw her the night of her accident. She was at the Elkhorn Lodge, taking pictures of men loading crates into trucks. Mr. Pierce was there." The room fell silent. Walter felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him, leaving him suspended in freefall. Sarah had been investigating Pierce the night she died. The confirmation of his long-held suspicions brought no satisfaction, only a hollow ache and renewed rage. Ryan exchanged meaningful glances with Mercer. "We need to talk," he murmured, gesturing toward the door. As they stepped outside, Rebecca moved to check Shadow's bandages. "His wounds are healing remarkably well. All things considered, the military trains these dogs to be incredibly resilient." Walter barely heard her, his mind still processing Lily's revelation. He crossed to his granddaughter and knelt beside her chair. "Lily, how long have you known about your mom and Pierce?" "Since last night," she answered. "When Shadow was really sick, he showed me more clearly than before. Mom was hiding behind a truck. She had her camera. Then Mr. Pierce saw her." Lily's voice trembled slightly. "Shadow wanted me to know the truth." Walter struggled to maintain his composure. "Did Shadow see what happened next?" Lily shook her head. "Just that Mr. Pierce made a phone call. Then the picture stopped." She looked up at her grandfather, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "He had her killed, didn't he?" Walter pulled Lily into a fierce embrace, unable to shield her from the harsh reality, but determined to protect her from what was to come. "I believe he did, sweetheart. But we're going to make sure he pays for it." When Ryan and Mercer returned, their expressions confirmed that a decision had been made. "We're moving tonight," Mercer announced. "Pierce knows we've taken Nathan into custody. We intercepted communications indicating he's planning to leave the country within 48 hours. "Shadow can't be moved," Walter protested, rising to his feet. "We've arranged for a veterinary transport vehicle," Ryan assured him. "Full medical setup, climate-controlled. Shadow will be safer at our field headquarters in Missoula anyway. Pierce has too many connections in this county." Walter recognized the logic but remained concerned. "Where does Lily go in all this? She can't be separated from Shadow, not after everything they've been through." "She won't be," Mercer stated. "You'll both accompany Shadow to Missoula under our protection. We need her connection to him, her ability to interpret what he knows." The plan was set in motion with military efficiency. Within 2 hours, a specialized vehicle arrived, its interior configured like a mobile veterinary unit. Shadow was carefully transferred, his IV lines and monitoring equipment reconnected by Rebecca, who would accompany them to Missoula as they prepared to depart. Lily stood beside the transport kennel, her hand reaching through the bars to touch Shadow's muzzle. "We're going somewhere safe," she told him softly. "Somewhere Mr. Pierce can't find us." Shadow's amber eyes, clearer now as the fever receded, fixed on her with that same unsettling intelligence. He licked her fingers once, the simple gesture somehow conveying both understanding and reassurance. The convoy departed at sunset, 2 unmarked SUVs escorting the veterinary transport. Walter sat beside Lily in the vehicle's medical compartment, watching the Montana wilderness pass by through tinted windows. Rebecca monitored Shadow's vitals from the opposite bench, occasionally adjusting his medication. "He's stable," she reported after they had been on the road for an hour. "If anything, the movement seems to have improved his circulation. His oxygen levels are up." Walter nodded absently, his thoughts focused on Pierce and the growing certainty that the man was responsible for Sarah's death. The grief he had carried for 3 years crystallized into cold resolve. Pierce would face justice both for his criminal empire and for taking Walter's daughter from him. "Grandpa," Lily's voice pulled him from his dark contemplation. "Shadow wants to show you something." Walter looked at his granddaughter curiously. "Show me how—" "Through me," she explained, taking his hand. "Close your eyes and think about Mom, about the accident." Walter hesitated, scientific skepticism warring with his desperate need for answers. Finally, he closed his eyes, allowing Lily to place his hand on Shadow's head beside her own. What happened next would forever change Walter's understanding of the connection between humans and animals and provide the key to bringing down Nathaniel Pierce's empire of blood and corruption. As evening settled over the Missoula FBI field office, Walter Montgomery stood at the window watching snowflakes dance in the glow of streetlights. 3 days had passed since their dramatic escape from Pinecrest, 3 days of Shadow's remarkable recovery, of Lily's unwavering vigilance, and of Walter's growing understanding of the bond between his granddaughter and the German shepherd who had changed their lives. At 68, Walter had believed his purpose was behind him. Retirement had been a retreat from a world that had taken too much his wife to cancer, his daughter to violence disguised as accident, and nearly his own humanity to grief and isolation. He had built walls around what remained of his heart, content to live out his days in solitude, with only occasional reminders of the respected veterinarian and conservation activist he had once been. Then came Lily, traumatized into silence by her mother's death. Then came Shadow, bearing physical and emotional scars that mirrored their own. In the span of one snowy week, Walter had found himself thrust back into a world of purpose and connection, a world of danger and darkness. Yes, but also of profound meaning and unexpected hope. "Mr. Montgomery," Agent Mercer's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "We're ready for the briefing." Walter nodded. Following her to the conference room where Ryan Mitchell stood before an evidence board covered with photographs and documents, Lily sat nearby, Shadow resting at her feet. The dog's recovery had astonished even the FBI's veterinary consultant, wounds healing at an accelerated rate, strength returning daily. He still limped, and some scars would remain permanent. But Shadow was once again alert and aware, his protective instincts toward Lily unwavering. "We've corroborated the information Lily provided," Ryan began without preamble. "Sarah Montgomery was indeed at the Elkhorn Lodge the night she died. Her phone records show she made a call to her editor at 9:17 p.m., stating she had photographic evidence of weapons being loaded for transport." Walter's jaw tightened. The confirmation brought pain rather than satisfaction, the final proof that his estrangement from his daughter had cost him the chance to protect her when she needed him most. "What Lily and Shadow have given us," Ryan continued, indicating a series of photographs, "is the missing link between Pierce's legitimate businesses and his criminal operations. The specific loading dock, the vehicle identifications, the timing of shipments details that match perfectly with our existing intelligence." Mercer stepped forward. "We've obtained warrants to search all of Pierce's properties, including the underground facility beneath the Elkhorn Lodge that Lily described from Shadow's memories." "How soon?" Walter asked, the question heavy with implication. "Tonight," Mercer replied. "Pierce is scheduled to host the annual Pinecrest Winter Festival fundraiser. Most of the town will be there, including Sheriff Hayes. It's our best opportunity to catch him off guard." Walter exchanged glances with Rebecca, who had remained in Missoula to continue Shadow's treatment. They both understood the risks and the necessity of the operation. "What about Nathan Mitchell?" Walter asked, thinking of Ryan's half-brother, now in custody. "He's talking," Ryan confirmed, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "Offering everything he knows in exchange for reduced charges? His testimony corroborates what we learned from Shadow about Pierce's organization, including the dogfighting operation and its connection to weapons trafficking. And Sarah's accident." Walter pressed. A heavy silence fell over the room. Ryan finally spoke, his voice somber. "Nathan confirmed that Pierce ordered it. One of Hayes's deputies tampered with her brake lines. They knew her route home." Walter absorbed this, the grief he had carried for years hardening into resolve. "I want to be there when you arrest him." Mercer shook her head firmly. "Out of the question. This is a federal operation." "Pierce took my daughter," Walter interrupted, his voice calm but unyielding. "He tortured that dog and left him to die. He's terrorized an entire community for years. I've earned the right to see justice done." "Grandpa's a good shot," Lily added unexpectedly, drawing surprised looks from the agents. "Shadow showed me. He used to protect animals from bad men in Africa." Walter stared at his granddaughter, astonished by her knowledge of his past. He had never spoken to her about his work with Veterinarians Without Borders, particularly the darker aspects that still haunted his dreams. "Is that true?" Mercer asked, reassessing Walter with new interest. "I spent 5 years in anti-poaching operations," Walter admitted reluctantly. "Primarily medical support for the Rangers, but yes, I'm proficient with firearms and know how to handle myself in dangerous situations. Ryan and Mercer exchanged meaningful glances. We could use someone who knows the local terrain, Ryan suggested, especially if Pierce tries to flee into the backcountry. I'll stay with Shadow, Lily declared before anyone could suggest otherwise. He needs me here. Walter knelt before his granddaughter, meeting her eyes directly. Are you sure, sweetheart? I don't want to leave you. Lily nodded with solemn certainty. You need to finish this for Mom. And for Shadow. She wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering in his ear. Be careful. Shadow says Pierce is most dangerous when cornered. The operation was planned with meticulous precision. 3 tactical teams would simultaneously raid the Elkhorn Lodge, Pierce's lakeside home, and the warehouse where Nathan had indicated weapons were stored. Walter would accompany Ryan's team at the lodge, serving as both guide and witness. As Walter prepared to depart, donning the tactical vest provided by the FBI, Rebecca approached him in the hallway. Walter, she began hesitantly. When this is over, when Pierce is in custody and Shadow is fully recovered, what happens to us? Walter finished for her. She nodded, a question in her eyes that went beyond professional courtesy or the shared urgency of recent days. Walter realized with sudden clarity that amid the chaos and danger, something had bloomed between them, a connection forged in their mutual dedication to Shadow's recovery and justice for Sarah. I don't know, he admitted honestly. 5 days ago, I was a recluse who'd given up on most of humanity. Now I have a granddaughter who talks to dogs, a German shepherd with PTSD, and a federal case that's turned my life upside down. He offered a wry smile. But I'd like to find out what happens next with you. Rebecca's smile held promise and understanding. Come back safely, and we will. The journey back to Pinecrest was made in tense silence, tactical teams reviewing their assignments while Walter gazed out at the passing landscape, memories of Sarah overlapping with thoughts of Lily and Shadow. The connection his granddaughter shared with the wounded military dog defied rational explanation, yet Walter had witnessed its effects too clearly to dismiss it. In Lily's drawings, in her quiet conversations with Shadow, in the inexplicable knowledge she possessed about events she couldn't have witnessed, Walter recognized something that transcended his scientific training. A bond that spoke to ancient connections between humans and animals, a communication that operated on levels beyond language. As they approached Pinecrest, lights from the Winter Festival illuminated the night sky. The annual event, held on the grounds of the Elkhorn Lodge, drew most of the community together for food, music, and the ceremonial lighting of the town Christmas tree. This year, it would serve as the backdrop for Pierce's downfall. Stay close to me, Ryan instructed Walter as they prepared to move into position. Our primary objective is securing evidence and apprehending Pierce. No heroics, no personal vendettas. Walter nodded. Though they both knew the promise was hollow, Sarah's memory deserved more than detached professionalism. The festival was in full swing when they arrived, the parking lot filled with vehicles bearing local license plates. Families moved between food vendors and craft booths, children's laughter carrying on the cold night air. On the surface, it was the picture of small-town Americana warmth and community standing against the winter darkness. Only Walter, looking beneath the festive veneer, could see the shadow Pierce had cast over Pinecrest, the missing pets never found, the witnesses to illegal activities who suffered convenient accidents. The culture of silence that had allowed corruption to flourish while good people looked away. Tonight, that silence would be broken. Pierce would face justice, and Pinecrest would begin the long process of reckoning with the darkness it had harbored. As Walter moved into position with Ryan's team, his thoughts returned to Lily and Shadow, waiting for news in Missoula. Whatever happened tonight, their lives had become irrevocably intertwined, an unlikely family forged in trauma and healing, in loss and unexpected connection. Shadow had come into their lives for a reason, beyond evidence or justice. The dog who had suffered so much had somehow become the bridge that connected a shattered family, helping a silent child find her voice and a grieving man rediscover his purpose. Walter checked his watch. 9 minutes until the raid would begin. 9 minutes before Pierce's carefully constructed world would crumble. 9 minutes before Sarah's death would finally be answered with justice. He drew a deep breath of the cold Montana air, steadying himself for what was to come, for Sarah, for Lily, for Shadow. Some bonds transcended death and distance, connecting past to future in ways that defied explanation but demanded honor. Walter Montgomery was ready to fulfill that obligation, whatever the cost.